If you're wondering what goes into finding a tenant for your rental property, then this is a video for you, because I'm going to break down step by step how to find and secure the best possible tenant for your rental property with or without an agent. Why am I offering this information, you ask? Great question. Shameless plug. I'm Stephanie Nause with the Homeplicity Realty Group here at Keller Williams. I am a real estate agent, and if this seems like it's going to cost you money, time, and resources that you're not prepared to invest, then I hope that you'll consider hiring me to find a tenant for your Toronto investment property. Okay, so before we get into it, like I said, I'm Stephanie Nause with the Homeplicity Realty Group here at Keller Williams. I'm passionate about helping our clients build and develop wealth through real estate. If you're interested in information on buying a home, selling a home, or investing in Toronto real estate, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to our channel. If you get good value from this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if there's anything that I didn't address, or you found a tenant on your own and it was super easy, or maybe you had not the best experience, then go ahead and drop it in the comments down below. Okay, so just because I'm an agent and just because I would love the opportunity to work with you finding a tenant doesn't mean that the information that I'm going to outline isn't going to be super valuable to you. So there's going to be some gold nuggets here, so stick through to the end. There's a lot of information, and that's because there's a lot of steps that go into finding a really great tenant that's going to look after your property and not cause you a lot of headaches. The first thing that you need to do if you want to lease your property in Toronto yourself is make sure that you have the price on point. So the two main things that we're always going to do when we're getting a property prepped for lease is we're going to make sure that we have the price in the right category, because there's no marketing, there's no ad, there's no pictures that can convince someone to pay more for the property than it's worth. The first thing you're going to want to do is take a look and do a lot of research on some of the online forums like Toronto Rentals, Facebook, LeapPad, and go onto MLS and just kind of look around and see what similar units to yours are listed for and what they're leasing for. You may want to even go and schedule a time to take a look at some of your competitors to see what they look like, how they show, what the space is looking like. So you basically want to make sure that you have an idea of where your property should lease, and then you'll also want to take a look at your financials to see how much is it going to cost me for the mortgage, the property tax, the maintenance. The tenant, if there's separate utilities, is likely going to pay their own utilities if it's a condo. If it's a house, there's varying different ways that that can be set up, but you'll want to see what your carrying costs are and then take a look at what the rental amount could be, and kind of, obviously your carrying costs and market value for rent have nothing to do with each other, but it will determine whether or not it even makes sense for you to rent the property. So the first thing is going to be to come up with a pricing strategy. And then the next thing is you're going to have to spend some money and have some nice pictures taken. Don't use the ones from viewit.ca. Like, they include it in their package, but they look terrible. They're really dark. It's just not the same. Invest a little bit of money. It usually costs between $250 and $350 to have photos done. That way you have beautiful photos that you can use every time you lease the property, and it will help it stand out, especially if you're going to be leasing the property yourself without an agent and posting it on a lot of the rental sites. Just having really nice pictures will mean that you can charge the top end of your rent, because you'll have more tenant inquiries, and the more people interested in the property means the higher you'll be able to rent the property for, if that makes sense. Making sure that it looks good and that it's priced properly and that people are calling you and wanting to take a look at the property will go a long way in helping you lease the property quickly and for the top amount of money that you could potentially secure. The third thing that you're going to want to do is set aside time for showing. As agents, when people hire us, we take care of all the marketing, we do all the pre-qualification, and the search engines and stuff we have access to get a lot more traction than some of the ones that you'll be using on your own to lease the property. We have also 70,000 agents that are on our Toronto real estate board, and we all have access to the listing. So just having the exposure there and the realtor network definitely helps us to be able to leverage and get things leased faster and for more money. So you'll want to make sure that you have time set aside for showings. What I would suggest is have certain days of the week that you're going to show the property. If you are running out and showing every time someone asks you for a showing request on your property, you're going to waste a lot of time and you're going to potentially have no-shows. And when we're talking about Toronto, like there's traffic, you have to find a parking space, getting there. It's inconvenient. When we assume that it takes between 10 to 15 people coming through and looking at the property before you get an actual offer on it, that's a lot of time investment, probably an hour for each showing. So what I do whenever we're showcasing one of our listings, every time we get tenant inquiries, I will actually have certain dates and times that I'll show it to them. And I set it in 15-minute increments. That way, if someone's a no-show, I'm not out. So for example, today is a Wednesday. So what I would do is I would start scheduling showings for like Thursday or Friday. And I would say, don't give people a window of time, because if you do that, they're going to come whenever and you waste a whole bunch of time yourself. So what you want to do is say, I'll be showing it, but come at 5 o'clock, between 5 and 5:15. That's that person's time slot. And hopefully if your pictures look good and the price is right and you're doing your marketing, you'll have a constant flow of people that are reaching out and wanting to see the property. Then the next person will be 5:30 to 5:45, or 5:15 to 5:30, 5:30 to 5:45, and so on. That way, if people do happen to come at the same time and overlap, it creates a little bit of a sense of urgency because they see that other people are interested in the property. And at the same time, if someone doesn't show up, I just miss 15 minutes. I'm not standing waiting forever for someone to come. If you're booking, don't book too far in advance for people to come. They'll forget about the appointment. They'll lease something else. They just won't show. So I try and do between 24 and 48 hours. I'm booking them out and I'll set that time aside. And then you want to, the day of, send everyone a reminder email and be like, hey, I'm seeing you at 5:15, so that you have a higher chance of people coming. And if the first person cancels, then you can just come a little bit later, or you can arrive a little bit early and, set up whatever you feel comfortable doing. But that's how I usually stack my showings and appointment times, so that I can be there for an hour and hopefully show to multiple people. If people don't come, I'm not as angry, and then I'm not all like multiple times in one day driving back and forth to the property. If you're not living in it, that can be really, really inconvenient. Or if you have a tenant, if your property is already tenanted, you have to give 24 hours notice to the tenant, and it's going to be a hassle for you to be constantly like trying to arrange all the showings. So I would have a couple days. I would expect at least one weekend day that you'll have to set aside some time to be hunting for a new tenant and, scheduling time for that. I don't ever let people have an open house time where I say it comes between 1 and 4, because then people just show up whenever. I never know if they're coming, and there's potential that I'm sitting there for 3 hours by myself on my phone when I could have been doing something else. So you definitely want to be mindful of that, and confirming appointments, not booking them too far in advance, and stacking the appointments in very short intervals, because that shows people that other people are interested, and at the same time will just make the best use of your time. The other thing you want to do is prep the property. So before you even get the property photographed and on the market, you want to do a couple things. So first of all, you want to talk to your insurance company, and you want to make sure and see sort of what they're going to do in terms of insurance. If you're not going to be living in the property and there's going to be a tenant there, you don't want there to be a fire, or God forbid, like something happens to the tenant and then you're not covered under your insurance. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing you're going to want to do is talk to your accountant, because once you start renting the property, it's no longer a primary residence. If it ever was in the first place, if you bought it as an investment, then it's a little bit different. But if you were previously living in the property and transitioning it into a rental property, then you're going to want to talk to your accountant, because there's going to be capital gains and just tax implications on how that will work. And you'll also have to claim your rental income. So you'll want to have a conversation with your accountant about that and what that means for you moving forward. And then you'll likely have to do an appraisal as well. So from the date that the property transitions from a primary residence into a rental property, from the day that the tenant moves in and gets their keys, you have to have a valuation of the property. So whenever clients hire us, that's part of the package that we offer. We'll actually do a letter of opinion of value and like a generic appraisal, like a real estate version of an appraisal with a letter of opinion that we can send over to your accountant for your taxes the following year. If you're going to do it on your own, then you'll likely have to pay an appraiser. That's usually between $500 and $750 to do. And that way you have that, so that if you do, like when you end up selling the property down the road, you have that value established for what the property was at the date of when the tenancy started, when it became an investment property. So just something to be mindful of. and if there's any fixes that need to be done, you want to usually repaint the unit. I always recommend my clients do this. Oftentimes they don't want to because they're like, oh, it's expensive, but you don't really want the tenant doing it. Tenants are going to complain if the paint is all like sketchy and scuffed up. And I really don't ever, like for my investment properties, I had one tenant who offered to paint it himself. Such a nice guy. It was the worst job I've ever seen. He got paint all over the baseboards. He got paint all over the ceiling. I think he thought he was doing me a favor, but in the end, I still had to end up paying for my painter, and there was paint on the floor that my cleaner had to scrape off. So, it's always better if you just get ahead of it, and that way the tenant isn't painting it some wild color. You can have it professionally painted, have it look really great. If there's rental income, if it's profitable at the end of the year, you can write off that fee, and you can actually write off my fee if you choose to hire an agent, myself or another agent or property management company. You can write off our professional fee at the end of the year as well against your taxes. But that's just something to keep in mind, is you probably want to fix all that stuff up and get it prepped and ready to go so that the tenant's not bugging you and upset after they move in if the faucet's not working or there's some repairs and stuff that needs to get done. If you have a tenant currently in place, it's good to ask them and say, hey, is there anything that I should be fixing, anything that needs attention, so that they can let you know, and that way they're not going to tell potential tenants when they come through. It's just good to get ahead of all of those things. For the lease agreement in Ontario, this will take a lot of research. So this is the main thing, like pricing the property out and doing the marketing and posting on all the sites. That's the easy part. The hard part is doing the due diligence and structuring an actual lease agreement that will protect you, that will protect the tenant, because we can't actually get them to agree to stuff that contravenes the Residential Tenancies Act. So you'll have to do a little bit of research and maybe have some calls with the landlord and tenant board just to kind of get a sense for what you can and cannot do and what you can ask for. And this is obviously, like, I live in Toronto. Any of the leasing and stuff we do is specific to Toronto, Ontario. Different provinces have different laws. So if you have an investment property in Montreal or British Columbia, then the way things work here in Toronto are going to be very different. Or even in the States or overseas, we have a lot of clients that have investment properties that are overseas. There's different rules and regulations. So you'll definitely want to brush up and spend some time familiarizing yourself with that. And the landlord and tenant board does have a hotline that you can call to ask a lot of questions. So you can feel free to do that and just educate yourself. But there's two lease agreements usually that we do when we're representing our clients. There's one that's the offer to lease that spells out the pricing and all of the different terms, like who's responsible for paying for what. And then the Ontario standard lease needs to be completed. That legally has to be provided to the tenant I think within 30 days of them moving into the property. If we don't provide it to them, then they actually cannot pay their rent and until we provide it. And if we skip a second month then of them living in there without providing it, then I think they don't, even if we give it after, they don't have to give it back to us. We always make a point of having it to them before, having it to them and signed before they get their keys, just to kind of get that out of the way. But we end up drafting two lease agreements, and I've leased over 500 leases likely in my career. I've been selling real estate and leasing properties for our clients for 15 years. Obviously, we're very familiar with the landlord and tenant board on our team and just the Ontario and Toronto tenancy laws. So that's definitely important to keep yourself out of trouble or thinking that you're covering your bases. Like things such as we can't actually say no students. Like there's human rights violations and things that you can get in trouble and be fined if you're saying the wrong thing. We can't actually stop people from getting a pet, but there's things that you can do ahead of time if you know how to phrase those questions properly to get ahead of it. But there's certain things that you can and cannot say, and you can't write into the lease agreement. So even if we write into the lease agreement, no pets for the tenant, there's nothing stopping them from getting a pet after the fact down the road. They would still be responsible for any damages that they cause to the unit due to their willful or negligence, or their guest do, or the pet would be, but there's a whole different rule around that. And we also can't ask for damage deposits in Ontario, which is a shame, because if someone's dog or guest, or, I had recently a situation where the tenant put like a hot pot, looked like down on the floor of my client's unit, and it burned a hole in the floor, like a black ring on the floor. Luckily, we were able to negotiate for the tenant to cover the bulk of the cost of repairing the floor for my client. But that's something that if they don't agree, you would have to take them to small claims court. So Having things like getting all your your rent up front, like a year's rent up front. In Ontario, we legally can't ask for more than first and last month's rent up front, or key deposits have to be no more than the cost of replacing the keys. So if we're asking for this stuff and we think that it's okay, the tenant can turn around and ask for it back, right? So there's nothing stopping them from paying us a whole year's rent up front, but then moving into the unit and saying like, hey, I want it back. So I just like to kind of always prep that. You'll have to do your due diligence, call the landlord and tenant board, and just make sure that any of your posts and ads that you're doing are not against the human rights violations or just discriminatory, because you could get penalized for that. And most of the rental sites will take your ad down. So you want to make sure that the unit is prepped and that you're up to date with that. If you actually need to have some repairs done, we usually use Jiffy on demand, and they're great. It's really easy. Like, I do this even after our tenants have moved in. If someone messages and is like, hey, the toilet's not working or the dishwasher's not working, you can usually get someone to come in within 24 hours. Those are the types of things that will also be spelled out in the lease agreement. I usually ask the tenants to pay the first $50 of repairs for each repair, and that just stops them from messaging me about like a burnt out light bulb or like little small things that they could easily fix themselves. If there is something that actually needs work to be done, then we'll hire Jiffy on demand. I'll actually put my link down below. If you want to use it, you can get $25 off, and I'll get $25 off for the next time we use them. So it's a win-win for everybody. And if not, still feel free to go through, look at their site and use it, because it's really, really easy. It sends me an invoice and a bill, and it's all housed within the app. So I find at the end of the year for my accountant, it's really easy for me to showcase that and provide it, or for our clients as well to have access to it. Even if they're out of the country, it's really easy for them to use that. And you just would invoice the tenant $50 for whatever the repair is and move forward. Once you actually have the lease agreement accepted and it's all compliant with the landlord and tenant board rules, and you and the tenant have agreed on price and who's covering what utilities and when they're moving in and all that other good stuff, the next important thing is going to be checking references. So this is where we spend the bulk of our time, and this is something that you definitely do not want to skimp on. I know you're tired now because you've done all this work in marketing and creating ads and having photos done and doing probably 10 to 15 showings on the property. It can be tiring and tempting just to take the first person that comes along, but there are a lot of professional lease scams happening for tenants, and there's nothing stopping them from moving in and not paying rent. The way that the legal system for tenancy law is structured is really heavily in favor of the tenant. So once they get in, it's really hard to get them out. And if they know this, that could be between 6 months, more likely 12 months plus before you would get a hearing. So the cost of having a problematic tenant is your legal fees, like you probably have to hire a paralegal. The cost to file an eviction and L2 application is I think around $200+ now, and then you have to physically go and do that. Waiting for the trial date, like the cost of the small claims, plus the rent you're not getting if they're living in your unit and you're paying your property taxes, your mortgage, your maintenance fee, any of these things, and the tenant's just living there for free. That's rental income that you wouldn't be getting, plus any damages and stuff they've done to the unit, and then you have to wait for a sheriff. It could take likely upwards of over a year if the tenant just wants to camp out and not pay their rent. Trust me, you do not want this to happen to you. I've never had it happen to any of our clients, and I really don't want it to, but it's because we are meticulous about checking references. And if anything sets off my spidey sense, like even in the slightest, we likely will not move forward with the tenant. And I'm a landlord myself, and I'm very particular about who I put in my rental unit. So it's just something that you want to be very cautious moving forward with. You're definitely going to want to take a look at their employment letter and make sure that the company's legit. And I always Google and go on LinkedIn and see if they say that they work for the company, see what information I can find on the company. Whoever they put down as their boss, their reference, that person also shows up on LinkedIn. I never call the number that they put down for their landlord references or their work references, because that's literally the oldest trick in the book, to have your buddy put down as the name of your boss, and then it checks out in a Google search, but it's actually their friend being like, yeah, they're great. So I don't want to do this. Usually if it's a bigger company, which I definitely prefer, we'll call the HR department and we'll verify employment through the HR department. So that's a very helpful tip. As agents, we also have the ability to look up the address of the property to make sure that the person that they're listing as their landlord and the number and stuff that they have is actually on title for the property. You would be surprised how many times that's incorrect. Or we've even had people make up property addresses. It's just crazy. And because we are agents and have access to past lease and sold data, if the property, like sometimes I want to ask why they're leaving, and if they say they're leaving because the property is being sold or whatever, or they lease through an agent, I have the ability to actually pull up the past lease. If it's listed for sale, I can look at pictures of what their current place looks like. So obviously I have some extra intel, but there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to their current landlord, from the previous landlord before that, from going into the city and pulling like the property title reports and doing your due diligence there. But I would suggest like the main thing will be calling the HR department and not just whatever number they put down for their friend who's in the cubicle next to them, who's going to give them the best reference ever for a job employment. I've seen fake pay stubs. I've seen like when we Google the address for a workplace, it ends up being like a WeWork. I've seen it all. We've seen a lot of rental fraud and we've turned down a lot of tenants. If I feel even slightly uncomfortable, then we don't move forward. It's always up to my clients what they want to choose. It's their place, but I just let them know if this was me, I wouldn't take this tenant. And I think that when we talk about landlord references, the current landlord is not the best source of reference, because if this tenant is a pain in the ass, if this tenant is messy, if this tenant is causing problems and getting complaints, they're going to tell you that tenant is amazing because they want them to move out. So I always place more weight on the previous landlord beforehand because I want to hear what they have to say, because they have no skin in the game. And they're usually a little bit more open and honest just about what the experience was like with the tenant. And I've had amazing tenants myself, and I've had some that I didn't like so much. So you know, there's only so much that they can say because they don't want to get sued themselves for giving a poor reference. But at the end of the day, that's likely a better source. So you want to check out their Beacon score, their credit report with a Beacon score. I ask them to provide it. And then you want to just take a look at their debt ratios, right? If they, based on their income, if they have all these credit cards and they're all maxed out, I mean, typically people will pay their rent first, but is that really something that you want to potentially deal with, especially when we have some volatility and a potential recession coming? You want to make sure that the job sector and the employment and their debt ratios and everything are secure. And typically you don't want the rent to be more than a third of their income. If it's 50% or 75% of their monthly income, then, and it's a solo person or even like the combined salaries, and that's something that's going to be hard for them to support moving forward, because they're going to have other expenses like groceries and car payments and all of phone bills and internet and all of those other things, like utilities potentially, if that's not included in your lease. So you just want to make sure that the tenant has good references, that they have a good employment, that they're not on probation, and that their debt ratios look okay, and they have the financial ability and means to be able to carry the rents accordingly. So key exchange, you'll also want to set aside some time to exchange keys with the tenants. So on the actual closing date, if you have a tenant in place, you'll have to meet the previous tenant the day before, grab the keys from them and do a final walkthrough and point out any deficiencies and things that they would be responsible for covering. And then usually the next day on the closing date for the tenant, so the previous tenant has up until midnight the night before with the keys, and the new tenant technically gets them like the morning of, but those are things that you would schedule with them. You'll be meeting the tenant to give them the keys in exchange for their post-dated checks. If there's any utilities or tenant insurance, like we always ask our tenants to have their own tenant and liability, like contents and liability coverage, and to provide proof of that. So they'll give us that in exchange for the post-dated checks, if that's what you've agreed to in the standard lease as a form of payment for the keys and all of that stuff. And then this is something that we take care of for our clients, obviously when we're servicing them, but if you're going to rent it yourself, then this is something that you would take care of. And usually we'll do a walkthrough with the tenants. I let them take pictures of anything that looks like it's damaged. and then we document everything in email. Whatever keys were provided to them, we take pictures of it, and we have a form that we have them sign off on. If there's a key deposit, we'll have that also in writing, that the deposit was provided in exchange for the keys, and that there's no interest that's going to be given to them at the end of the lease on their key deposit, and that if the keys are broken or not returned, that we're going to deduct it and the balance will be delivered to them. So that's kind of how that works. So you'll want to make sure that everything's documented, and if anything's not working, that it's noted, and you'll move forward with fixing it. You can use Jiffy, like I had mentioned. The best rental sites is Treb. The one that we have access to as agents, because it's just leveraged to 70,000 other agents. But if you're going to do it on your own, then I find that I get the best traction from Facebook Marketplace. That's a free site, and every couple of days you can boost the post, which is fantastic. And then you can post on Craigslist, Toronto Rentals, I think LeapPad, and there's probably some other ones. I know that viewit.ca, you can do a paid post. I find I get no traction from Viewit anymore. Like, it's literally, they just charge me the $70 a month, and I don't really get any calls or inquiries. I think it's a little bit outdated maybe, but you could also do a paid post on Kijiji. You can mark stuff as urgent and boost it up. And then other great places to post it would be a community Facebook page, or if there's a condo, if there's a building Facebook page. Oftentimes management will let you draft up a little post, and you can post it in the mailroom of the condo complex so that anyone who's looking will see it. And that's another great way if someone is looking to switch units, or they have a friend who's looking to move into their building, that they can share that. Other than that, that's pretty much what we do to get properties leased. I know that sounds like a lot of work, and you have the investment for the pictures, for a home appraisal, for drafting the lease agreements up if you want to do that. So if this seems like it's a lot of work and a lot of costs up front, because we cover all of those as realtors when we're handling the process for our clients, then I would be more than happy to apply for the job of helping find a tenant for your rental property. Feel free to reach out or DM me. And if you're in the market to purchase an investment property, we have always a hot list we keep for our clients of the best new investment properties on the market, houses and condos. So you're more than welcome to reach out for a copy of that. As always, I hope that you'll consider subscribing to the channel. If you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up. And until next time, bye for now, and feel free to follow us at Homeplicity Realty on Instagram and Facebook. Bye.